The night the city forgot my name, I learned how to make silence into a weapon. I'm Lena, 36. And for most of my adult life I believed small things could be fixed with steady hands and better code. I was a cybersecurity analyst by training and a fixer by temperament, the person friends called when accounts were hacked or an email went haywire. I trusted patterns. I trusted signatures. I trusted people until their behavior proved otherwise. That faith broke in a single precise moment. It started with a message that landed like a stone in a still pond. A short, encrypted file in my inbox labeled, "For Lena, Archive." I opened it at 2 in the morning because that's when my brain was clearest and the apartment was quiet. Inside were bank transfers, timestamps, and a name I knew well. Tomas Hale, the CEO of Halebridge Logistics, the company that had sponsored my sister's scholarship fund. He was a public man. Press photos, slick interviews, a philanthropic profile that gleamed. The file whispered something darker. Offshore accounts, shell invoices, a ledger with line items that matched contracts my sister's nonprofit had been denied for. And then one line that tasted like betrayal. Payment to operational partner. My husband's name. Daniel had been my anchor for 10 years. Blunt, steady, the kind of man who could replace a sump pump at midnight and then make coffee like it was a love letter. He'd been patient with my long nights, proud of my work, supportive in ways that had once felt like a rare currency. I stared at his name in the ledger and the world reoriented. The stone rippled. I didn't explode. I don't do theater. I copied everything, encrypted my copies, and left the apartment with nothing but a hoodie and a resolve that felt like ice. The city's night air smelled of diesel and rain, a familiar scent that used to make me feel like home. That night it tasted like metal. The days after were clinical. I watched Daniel like a scientist watching an experiment that might combust. He went to the office, smiled for the camera, came home smelling faintly of expensive cologne. He spoke in grammar that kept nothing in danger. Contracts, consultations. It's complicated, love. He thought my quiet was ignorance. I let him believe that. The trick in these things is to let the guilty sense comfort as you collect the evidence that will prove them wrong. I recruited 2 allies, people who knew how to keep a secret because they had secrets of their own. Nisha, an old colleague who now worked as a financial investigator for a boutique firm, agreed to trace the money if I provided the ledger. And Rowan, a former colleague turned private investigator with a limp from an old motorbike crash, positioned himself as my eyes in places my badge couldn't reach. They were careful, competent, and morally measured. Qualities I needed because glee is a poor companion at the top of a fall. We found the pattern quickly. Halebridge funneled small sums into a consultancy that, on paper, provided logistics audits. The consultancy then routed payments to a nominee director in a country 2 borders away. Every transfer was intentionally mundane. Coffee break amounts, low enough to avoid automatic flags. But the timeline told a story. Payments increased whenever my sister's foundation was rebuffed or when a bid for school supplies fell through. It was a soft theft of public good masked by legal camouflage. Then I found the other ledger, the one in Daniel's handwriting. He'd kept a paper copy, a desperate, illicit echo of his bank transfers, in the false pocket of his old jacket. I discovered it because I had begun reading his patterns. He liked to move his laundry on Sundays and never put the jacket away. The writing was not neat. It had the tremor of someone who'd been writing in low light, trying to justify numbers with excuses that read like prayers. Confrontation is seductive. It offers the satisfaction of immediate reaction. I didn't choose it. Instead I set a trap with rules. No public shaming without verified accounts, no arrests without corroborated evidence, and always, protect the innocent. The non-profit, the staff, the small-time suppliers who'd been kept waiting, they were the reason I would not be petty. We planned the reveal like a surgical procedure. Timing mattered. I wanted a stage where Halebridge's optics would be visible. A board meeting, a press conference, a gala. Somewhere the company's loyalists would gather and the truth could not be distilled into rumor. The annual logistics summit in the city fit perfectly. Lead donors, regulators, and investors in one room, and a live feed that meant a lie would be hard to spin. In the week before the summit, Nisha fed us evidence that made my skin prickle. She'd gotten subpoenas quietly requested through a lawyer friend, and paperwork began to arrive that confirmed the consultancy's nominee director had recently visited the same shipping docks that Halebridge used. Rowan surveilled Tomas' aides and found discrepancies in travel receipts. We stitched everything into a timeline that threaded my sister's denied grants with the small payments that bloomed into a pattern of influence peddling. The night before the summit, Daniel did what he'd always done when confronted by stress. He drank in silence and tried to sleep. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom and watched him breathe slow. The man I had married was not a monster in the cinematic sense. He was a bad choice made soft by intimacy, a person who had let expedience and the promise of upward movement override the quiet ethics that had been our foundation. I could have left then. I could have walked away with nothing. But I had made promises too, to the community, to my sister, to myself. Promises require action. The summit hall was all soft light and sharp suits. Cameras tuned like birds. Tomas Hale raised a glass and thanked a room of people who saw him as a benefactor. He was polished in public the way predators are. Gentle hands, generous smiles. I sat near the back, in a dress that made me feel like the old me and like an instrument both at once. My hands didn't tremble, but my heartbeat counted like a metronome. When the Q&A opened, I listened to banalities until I could speak my truth without hysteria. I asked Tomas a direct question, about the operational partner entries and whether he could explain the nexus between Halebridge bidding activity and the denied contracts of my sister's foundation. Cameras snapped. He smiled and gave the kind of corporate answer made of velvet and misdirection. That was our cue. Rowan and Nisha had prepared packets. We distributed copies of the ledger to the press, to regulators present at the summit, and to a few select investors who had been suspicious of irregularities. The room, which had been warm with the comfort of networked applause, shifted into a hush. Tomas' face flushed. Daniel sat beside him, pale, uncomprehending. He had no theatrics left because we had not given him one. The evidence was patient and relentless. It was messy. Lawyers moved like sharks. Tomas protested that the transfers were for advisory fees and logistics optimization. Daniel stammered that arrangements had been misinterpreted. But the paper holes are cruel teachers. A bank transfer carries a date and a signature and an origin, and those things don't lie. The legal process that followed was not cinematic. There were subpoenas and meetings, closed-door negotiations, and the kind of courtroom arithmetic that eats emotion and replaces it with ledger lines. Tomas' empire staggered under audits. Halebridge felt the press like an ache. Regulators opened inquiries. Daniel, who had expected to be protected by proximity and charm, found himself exposed in the stark light of documents. I learned an ugly truth about revenge. It is not pure cost. There were contractors who lost short-term contracts while audits cleaned house. There were employees who feared layoffs and suppliers who panicked. That knowledge settled heavy on me. Revenge without repair is hollow, something I had promised myself I would not do. So I stewarded the aftermath with the same obsessiveness I'd used to plan the reveal. I coordinated with Nisha to set up emergency payments for affected vendors. I testified, calmly, in front of panels and insisted on the restitution of funds where the evidence was incontrovertible. I reached out personally to people whose livelihoods were at risk, and arranged temporary bridges until audits completed. Revenge, if it is to be just, must include repair. Daniel's fall was quieter than I expected. The man who had once been my axis confessed with a kind of brittle humility that shocks because it lacks malice and is all regret. He paid what he could, did the work we agreed for his restitution, and attended therapy that smelled of something like penance. I forgave him in a way that was practical and unromantic, not reconciliation with the past, but an agreement to not let bitterness define my life. Some doors closed, others opened. My sister's foundation got a re-examination of denied grants. The public pressure forced oversight that the industry desperately needed. Years later, the summit is a footnote. Tomas is a cautionary tale. Halebridge exists in a leaner, more scrutinized form. Daniel and I found a way to be co-parents without being co-conspirators. My sister's school program now runs with transparent governance and an auditing committee that includes community members. A measure of accountability I helped install. I teach workshops now, not about vengeance but about detection. How to read a pattern, how to protect a non-profit, how to steward truth without flaying people alive. The lesson I took into my bones was not about the thrill of outsmarting a wrongdoer. It was about the price of silence and the obligation of evidence. Revenge, when it is thoughtful, is not an ode to cruelty. It is a demand for correction. It asks that those who profited wrongfully return what they took, and that systems be strengthened so the theft cannot be repeated. Sometimes late, when the apartment is quiet and the city hums far below, I open the encrypted file I first received. I don't need to reproof my anger. I study the ledger like a cartographer studies an old map. The routes, the dead ends, the ways people tried to hide in plain sight. Knowledge is a dangerous kindness. It taught me to be vigilant rather than vengeful, to be repair-minded rather than triumphant. If you ever find the same cold ink naming someone you love, remember this. Collect, corroborate, protect the innocent, and plan the reveal with care. Make the truth do its work, but do not forget the cost. Justice that heals is the only kind worth seeking.